So this right here is the feed end of the machine. This is where we're going to load. You guys probably already know that. Most of you guys have run it. This table lifts and lowers. That's where we're going to load our material. You can use both trays, load in the bottom while this one is running. There you guys can see that. Some important things down here. This rear guide and these side guides are obviously adjustable. I will show you how I square that stuff up and get that happy when we get into messing around with the machine. There is some important things here to look at. This little switch right here is the up position switch for this table. So if that's bent or damaged or something, or if the position of this table is coming to a funny spot, then the first thing I'd be looking at is that switch. It's adjustable with screws and stuff like that. So, and that the actuator here can easily be bent. So if you're having trouble with the up position of the table, then that's going to be our first go-to there. So this area here, we call this the picker. And this is like, we call it a stabber. And it's not a real technical term, but that's going to stab into the paper. This is going to come down, pinch, and pull it into this first set of belts. Okay. Now, when we change the amount that we're picking, so we have a set amount and it's an actual thickness of paper, it's not an amount of sheets. What's changing? None of this changes. What changes is the amount that the table increments up each time, right? So if we change it from 10,000s to 20,000s, this table is going to increment up 20,000s rather than 10,000s. So this part of the machine is stupid, right? It doesn't know what it's grabbing. So the covers do have safety switches in them, so you can't do certain things with the covers open. This button here, all of the green buttons on the machine do the same thing. It means go. And that will start feeding paper, running the big one. Okay. That's what it says. This one is also down at the other end. Yeah, I guess there's other green buttons, but this one is the one at the end, and then down here, this is going to be all doing the same thing. So if I got this one down on this side, even if that side is clear, this one only lifts this side of the machine. That's what that means. That's what happens. Well, it'll lift it and then it should start running. It doesn't start running. It used to. Well, we'll dive into one thing at a time, but in theory, that should start the machine. And depending on where the table's at, okay, it is going to bring the table up if it's not happy. So, remember I showed you this switch? That is the height for the table, okay? So when you run out of paper, it's going to raise all the way up until it makes that switch. But when we load paper in it, and the table is down here, the height of the paper is controlled by this sensor back here. And that one is actually looking for the paper, not for the table, right? So that's the one that's going to see the stack of paper. This one is actually going to see the table. Because when it's down here, something has to tell it when to stop. That's what that guy's doing. So, like I said, we'll adjust a bunch of this stuff together. So you guys, if nothing else, we'll try and touch all the knobs and levers and stuff. That way you're comfortable with it. A lot of times it's hard for me to remember what certain things do until you move it. And then you say, oh, okay, that was this guy.
So if that's that for some reason, the eye will help you to stop breathing.
In theory, yes. Depends on where the positions of things are at. If you were to take the switch completely off, then eventually, yes, that would stop the tape. So, moving on this direction in the machine, our paper is grabbed here and it's pulled in. The amount that it grabs is based on what we tell the machine, okay? We're going to come into this section. Once we enter this section of the machine, okay, I would consider this machine to be not like intelligent, Okay, we're not really acting off sensors, switches, things like that. We're acting off the mechanics of the machine. All of the drive mechanism, all of the jogging, and all that stuff that's happening in this area of the machine is mechanical, right? So if we stop paper somewhere in here, there are a couple of switches that can stop it. It's just going to stop that main motor. But we're not going to stop it from doing one of the functions inside of that area because they're all mechanical. So they're just riding on cams and gears. It's going to go through its cycle one way or another. Paper gets pulled into here, okay? It's going to make its way all the way up into the die section. In between here, we have a few different things going on. These, I would call them skis, are what's going to hold the paper down, especially on the outside edge if you have that curly paper, right? So there should be a gap there. It shouldn't be touching, but also it shouldn't be such a huge amount because obviously we're only going to be picking a little amount. So we want just enough clearance for the paper to go through there and not get jammed up, but also not so wide because this right here, now this might not be adjusted perfectly, but that right there is a safety switch. And if you have a jam here where you have multiple stacks of paper built up on each other, it should trip that, okay? This is essentially doing the same thing, okay? That's the height of the paper. That can be adjusted. It's actually set really high right now. So, because in theory, if you change your pick amount, you would have to readjust that. Right now, it's kind of just more set as a emergency. It sucked in a giant chunk of paper. It should stop it. Okay. So we have a couple of switches in here, that one and that one. Both of those can shut the machine down. Also, we have the safety switches for the door. If you pull the door open while it's running, it should also stop, right? We lift it up, okay, because there's a bunch of stuff we can adjust in this area. There's a little prop right here. Okay. So a bunch of stuff in here that we can adjust. When we set up, we'll play around with a bunch of this stuff, and I'll kind of show you my theory for where it should be set. But this set of wheels can be adjusted back and forth. This one isn't as critical as this one. That'll be that wheel right there, and that should be just outside the tail of the sheet, right? So right in the crotch of that roller and this belt, I want the sheet just on the outside of that radius. Because I don't want this roller holding the sheet when it gets pulled through, but also I want to get it all the way up in there, right? This brush is in here. You can take that on and off if it's ever causes issues. That's really just to hold that tail of the sheet down and kind of help control the paper. So this set of wheels can be moved in and out. And then another important thing is, you shouldn't have to play with this, but this little screw here protrudes down through there, right? And that is adjusting the height that these belts sit on top of each other. I don't want the belts smushed into each other, right? But I also don't want such a huge gap because they need to grip both sides of the paper. Because remember, if we're driving the paper, one sheet of paper, we can drive it with a single belt. But if you have two sheets of paper and you're driving it from the bottom only, the top sheet of paper can go all over the place. So the goal with this machine, the way it has two sets of belts running on top, we have to control the whole stack together the whole time, right? So anyways, all of this stuff up in here is adjustable. And like I said, we'll go over how I set it up. And then also in this area, we have a couple other things going on. So we got to get the paper up into the die section, okay? Once we get it into the die section, but before we punch, we need to make sure that all those sheets of paper are square with each other on the outside and on the front to back, right? So in all directions, we need those jogged up. So we're going to jog the paper here, and that's what these guys do. And those are adjustable, right? So we want it to come in when it jogs, and we want it to be tight, but we don't want to see the paper buckle at all, right? So we'll test that when we start playing around with it. depending on how important your registration is, you can leave them a little loose, or if you really need it to be perfect, you can get them tight. But like I said, what you don't want to see is when they're all the way in, you don't want to see any buckle in that paper. I'll show you how I set those. So we can jog in this direction, and then right here, this is down right now, but this little set of fingers comes up in the back and jogs the back of the sheet, right? And we can also change the position of those. All right, and all of that stuff, the jogging, is all happening mechanically down there. So there's no separate motor, no separate sensors or anything. That's all mechanically driven with cams and cam followers and all that stuff, right? So if we get our sheet of paper up into this section, we jog it from the outside, and we go to jog the tail, it has to jog against something, right? So if we move past the die section for a minute, we'll go back to the die a little bit. Back here, you guys want to look, this one is kind of important, and I don't know how much of this stuff you guys have looked at before. See these little brackets? There should be 4 of them, maybe 6 even. Okay, there's 6. See those little guys? That is what the paper is jogging against, so we'll call it a headstock in this situation, right? So the paper is going to come in, these raise and lower. And when they raise up, the paper is going to come in, land against those, the tail jogger is going to push right up against them. They can be moved around, but I don't really see that being necessary, and you can actually take some of them out. But in your case, I think you want to leave them all in. They have a little plastic finger at the front, okay, and that's what the paper should be hitting against. When we start looking at paper, I'll show you guys this punch. There is kind of a distinct sets of lines. You look at a whole stack of punched paper where you can actually see where it's coming in and hitting these headstocks. You might even be able to see it in that stack there, I'm not sure. So you'll see those lines in the sheet, and that is from these headstocks, right? So if you adjusted these tail joggers to really smush it into those, then you'll see those lines get more pronounced. If you set it so it's not even touching and it's close, you'll get rid of those lines. Right? So those lines you'll see in the stacks are kind of, you want it to register good, you're going to have a few little marks here. Okay. So that mechanism comes up and down, and again, like I said, same with all the other stuff happening in this area, it's all mechanical. There's no sensor or anything like that you can adjust. It is cams and bearings riding on cams. So if the machine is working correctly and all that stuff is timed, then all that stuff should be happening at the right time. Once it's punched, these lower back down, okay, this set of rollers here are going to come back down, and then they're going to drive that stack out. So this set of rollers here, you'll actually see go up and down, up and down, up and down. Okay, and while it's punching, they should be up, and then after it punches, these will lower back down. That set of wheels will come down and drive that set of paper into this section. Okay. So it's just going to ride between these 2 belts. I know you guys replaced one of these belts at one point.
It's the lighter green.
Yeah. So it's riding in between those 2 belts. And like I said, explained before, why do we have to have 2 belts? Because we have a whole stack of paper, not just one sheet. It's going to come around this, right? And the reason why we have this in this machine is because we want to stack them in reverse order so that we get the same. Otherwise, if we were just delivering straight out, we would have all sorts of trouble. So this is basically just flipping our stack back over. So it rides around that big set of wheels there, flips it over, and then it lands down in here. So kind of from here back, we're all talking about mechanical things happening, okay? But when we get down here into the jogging section, there are some things that are happening electronically. So I'll explain that stuff and how it works. Now it's going to be a little bit tricky because we'll have to get down there and look at this one. This table's up. We have down here for this tray, we have two sensors, okay? An up position sensor and a lower table position sensor. And here's our lower switch. Here's our upper switch. Okay? So those two switches tell this table where to be. Okay? So can everybody see that switch? Okay, so that's really related to this. And then this guy is what takes over while we're running and sees our stack of paper, and that's what's going to tell this to increment down, right? So as this fills up with paper, it makes this switch. This table is going to increment down. So every time this switch gets made, it's going to lower a little bit based on how much we're picking, right? So that's what this switch does. Now, it's getting a little more complicated, but I want you guys to see how this works. Right up here, we have like 3 Hall switches, okay? Those trigger some different things in the machine. Most importantly, that is what triggers these air cylinders to jog. So if we actually watch this thing run, when I can't remember which one of those gets made, that's what triggers these to jog. And it also triggers a couple other things. So those are electrical things that are happening. Everything else up there is all mechanical. There are little needle valves on these, okay? One for our ingoing and one for our outgoing. By adjusting those, you can control how much they jog or with how much force or how quickly, okay? And we can play with those and slow the jogging down and do some other things like that. I think they're set pretty good right now, so we might not want to mess with those. But each one of these air cylinders has a needle valve on it that we can adjust. And the position of this one is essentially fixed. I'm sure you can move it if you wanted to. But this one is simply fixed. That's going to jog the tail of our sheet. But our head stop in this direction has a lever on it. We can loosen that up and move that around. Okay? So whenever we stack, it doesn't really matter what size we're stacking. The tail of the sheet's always going to be huge. So if we're stacking big paper, it's going to be like, change it this direction, right? And we can adjust that by putting this here. And we can move the position of these with that crank right there by rows, right? So we won't mess with it right now, but you can loosen that up, crank that. And again, these are self-centering, and they should move in and out proportionately, okay? So I'll show you when we get into playing with it. I'll show you kind of like I said, my theory for setting up the delivery section of the machine. Okay, and everybody's going to have a little different way of doing it. I'll show you what mine is, and it'll kind of give you an idea of what's going on. Okay, so here's pretty self-explanatory. This green switch should do the same thing as the green switch at the other end. We'll experiment with that. This should stop the machine. That stop switch should be a soft stop, meaning that when you hit that, it should complete enough cycles that the last sheet of paper gets through. Not sure, we might have to play with that. And then these are just our table up and down. Down is manual. You have to hold that down to go down. Up should be automatic.
So when I just go
Yep, that's totally fine. Yep.
because a lot of times, a couple times, doing something right, that didn't go up.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
just that.
Nope, you're fine. Yeah, if that table is down and you hit the button over here, it should raise that table up. It should raise your pile up, and all that stuff should happen. Okay. So we have some other mechanical stuff we'll go over when we go into the die. I'll probably go through the screens for a while first, and then we'll mess around with the die and the whole die section, and then we'll do some setup. Okay. So, turning the machine on, we start with this screen. We have two options, a run screen or setup screen. Okay, we'll go to this run screen first. Okay, the run screen should have some of the basic information about what you're trying to do. Right here, speed, thickness, die type. Okay, we'll explain each one of those individually in other parts of the screen, but on the home screen, it's just telling you what you got going on. Okay, then you have a counter, and then you have start, and then you have stop. Okay, this green button should be the same as this green button, and this red button should be the same as that red button. Okay, help screen or the help button on these machines can be helpful. Sometimes it's a little bit rough translation, so you might have to use some problem-solving skills. But usually, this will give you some information about what's going on in the machine. And like I said, some of this information you read it's a little bit confusing. So, from this screen, I can go into my setup screens. If I went back and I hit setup to begin with, it would take me there right away. There's not really anything you can mess with in this run screen besides stopping and starting, right? If we go to setup, we have all kinds of stuff that we can play with in here. First thing, and probably the two kind of most important things that you guys are going to change is the amount of cycles that it runs, okay, and the amount of paper it grabs each time we're going on those cycles, right? So let's say that the paper that we're running is 4 thousandths thick, give or take. It might be 3.5, 4, but you have a cover in there occasionally, right? So 35 thousandths, probably going to be 8 to 10 sheets of paper, okay, give or take. And then when it grabs the cover, it would compensate for the thickness of the cover, right? So you might have 2 sheets in the cover or something. This is the amount of paper that you're going to grab each time, okay? And roughly 3.5, 4 thousandths should be a thickness of paper for regular text weight stuff. So you kind of use that as a guide. The cycles per minute, like I was talking about, this section to here is all mechanical, right? So that is essentially changing the speed that the motor runs, okay? And by changing the speed that the motor runs, all the cams and gears and stuff are all fixed. They're just going to go that much faster, right? So you set it for 80 cycles a minute, that motor's going to run the equivalent speed to produce 80 stacks of paper a minute. We'll play around with speeds and stuff. Sometimes you're better off. Depends on the paper. It's not always like a guarantee that, okay, I'm going to run text weight paper. I'm going to pick this amount at this speed. Next week you can go to run the job again, and based on humidity or where the job was run, came off the Rico, and next week you're running it on the the big KM, or who knows. That job might act completely different. You might have to say, all right, now I need to run 70 cycles and pick slightly more. Don't get locked into certain sizes. Sometimes having a slightly thicker amount that you're picking will help getting the sheets delivered down there, because you have a little heavier block and it kind of will travel a little nicer. Sometimes that thicker block doesn't cooperate. It really depends on the paper and maybe even the size that you're punching it or whatever. But This is a good medium-ish area. This 35,000 to 80 cycles.
So I have a quick question. So
Yeah.
when we run, so the thickness of it,
Yeah.
right? Is that based on how thick the actual paper is? So as an example, if I'm running like 110 pound spark stock through the machine, do I select a higher thickness or no?
Nope. So what that number does is it doesn't really equate to anything about the thickness of paper that you're running. If you're running thick paper and you have it set here, it might only be grabbing 2 sheets each time. Where if you're running thin paper, okay, it might be grabbing 10 sheets each time.
Okay, so it just determines how much of a grabbing, how much you grab. Okay.
What changes when we change that, okay, from 35 to 59 or whatever it may be, what we're changing in the machine is the amount that this table increments up each time.
Oh, okay.
So when we change that number, that directly relates to how this table moves up.
Got it.
So if we set that for, in theory, if we set that for 1 inch, that table would go 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch. Okay.
Got it. Okay. That makes
So
sense.
that's what we're changing when we change that number. And when we change the speed, the cycles,
That's how fast the
we're
motor.
actually changing how fast that's running, and in turn, changing everything kind of from this point to this point. All of that mechanical mechanism in the machine is just running that much faster.
Got it.
Okay. So those are kind of the 2 things that are fairly important that you'll probably, you'll have a comfortable area you run in, but you may change those a little bit based on what you're doing. So that's setup screen. Then we have a tab here that says setup screen 2. In here we can get deeper in all kinds of stuff. I'll show you some of the important stuff. This one that says format change screen. There is some stuff in here that you guys probably won't be messing with a lot, but I can kind of give you a quick rundown of some of the stuff that's important. This adjustment here that says exit table adjustment, paper jog adjustment. A lot of these are things that you shouldn't have to mess with a lot. I honestly wouldn't mess with those at all. Let's go back. Let's look at some stuff that's more user-friendly. This screen here, pile jog screen. That's one that you guys will use. That allows us to put those joggers in the delivery section in and out. And we want to do that so that we can see how close we are to our stack of paper, right? So that allows us to go in and out with those little cylinders down there. This jogging working time, we'll play with that maybe when we run some stuff. It has a little note here that says default is 2. We can actually change that. It's best to change some of that stuff when we run some stuff so that you guys can see what it actually does. But this basically just allows you to jog those in and out. That way you can see where they're at when you're doing setup. Okay. Die status screen. This one is kind of important. This gets into the die stuff a little bit, and so we'll kind of be jumping around back and forth into this stuff when we get into the die. But basically this machine keeps track of how many cycles are on a die, okay? And it tells you when to sharpen it and when to lubricate it. But it doesn't know what die's in the machine, okay? So this is kind of related to whether or not we're telling the machine what die we have in. So if we have 2 different dies and we're jumping back and forth between those 2 dies, the machine doesn't know that unless we tell it, right? So if we're running the 3-to-1 all day long, we put the 4-to-1 die in there, we don't change anything in the machine, and we run that for half the day, and then it starts telling us that the die needs to be sharpened or something. God only knows where it's really at in that cycle. So if that's something you guys want to keep track of, which I think that you do, it's going to be important that when we're changing dies around, that we're telling the machine what die we're using. Now, with that being said, it gets slightly more confusing, but you'll see that these dies have names, okay? And so you guys typically run two different types of dies, 3-to-1 oval, 4-to-1 oval. Here we have a die right here that says 4-to-1 oval. Great. There's not one that says 3-to-1 oval. There is one that says 3-to-1 round. Okay, so that's what we've been using as kind of the 3-to-1 round. Okay, but you guys might also have two dies that are 3-to-1, or two dies that are 4-to-1, because I know that they're working on buying some more dies, because sometimes some dies are going to be getting sharpened. Well, that one's getting sharpened, you're using the other one. How you want to keep track of this is kind of up to you guys. You'll have to kind of all agree on a system. But these slots here, it really doesn't matter what you're using each slot for, okay? But let's say your 4-to-1 die is on this 4-to-1 oval right here, and you have a second 4-to-1 oval die. My suggestion would be that we might want a note on there, a number. I'll show you in this other screen, so that we're referencing a number rather than a name of the die. I'll show you what I mean. So, die type screen. Okay. This one right here that says die type screen, this is where we're going to tell it what die we're using. Okay. So, let's say that we're running the 4-to-1 oval right now. Okay, the machine. So we change it to the 4-to-1 oval, number 6. Now let's say we have two 4-to-1 ovals. We can't keep it on number 6 and swap those back and forth. You can use these custom ones. You can use any of these. These are just names for these slots. They're not really changing anything in the machine, right? So if you want to keep track of specific dies, my suggestion would be like put on the die with a paint pen. This is die number 6. This is die number 4. This is die number 2, right? And then kind of ignore the names of the dies and just use the numbers as reference. You put die that says die number 4 in the machine, you come in here and you change this to 4, right? Then you run. While you're running, it's on die number 4. Ignore what it says as far as the name. That's the only way you're going to be able to keep track if you have multiple dies that are punching the same pattern. You know what I mean? You guys will have to kind of come up with a system and agree to that system as far as how you want to keep track. But essentially, you have 11 slots where you can keep track of dies. I know that's getting deep, but for you guys that run this much, it's probably going to be important to keep track of that stuff. You guys are going to run this really hard for certain periods of time, right? And during that time, this machine might be running for, in theory, 2 shifts a day for a month or 2 straight. You're going to have a lot of die changing back and forth. You might be changing between the same style die, but between both of them or something. So that's what it's going to be important to keep track of that. You're keeping track of the amount of cycles on that die, and then that's where this screen comes up, right? So when it says that you need to sharpen or you need to lubricate, then I would take their suggestion and get that done. If you get a new die back and it's your slot number 4 or 5 or whatever, and it says that it's all used up and needs to be sharpened, you get it sharpened, you get it back, then you can just reset that. And you just got a reset button right there, and then also lubricate. Later on, I'll show you how to lubricate the dies and my system for doing that. And then if you lubricate, you can reset here, right? You can actually get into the back screens and change the amount of cycles before those triggers happen. We'll just leave them at default. Okay, so
Do you happen to know the number of default?
I don't. I could probably figure it out, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
Die removal screen is where we have to go when we actually want to pull a die in and out of the machine. So we have to open some things up mechanically with this screen, change the die, and then close them back together. If we don't do this, there's certain positions the machine's in where we'll be able to pull the die out without changing it. But it throws the timing of things off when we do that. So basically this kind of sets it to, let's say it's going to top dead center, allows us to pull it out, put it back in, and it rotates back to its normal position, etc., etc. So this is where we're going to go when we want to change a die. We'll have to hit die removal. It'll open things up for us, pull the die out, put the next one in, and then we'll say, all right, we confirm the die change, and then it'll go back.
So when I was taught how to change the die over, I was told to hit the manual button to lower the dies, the guide in there, so you can just push the die into where it needs to go. Are we supposed to do that or no?
Yeah, I think you can do that. I don't think you're hurting anything by doing that. We'll play around with the die removal. I guess maybe I don't follow exactly what you're saying. It is tricky to get the dies in and out sometimes, so we'll play around with that. We'll figure out a good system with it as well. This is where you're going to go when you change dies to open things up and close things down. I'll show you. Out of paper cycle screen. That is the amount of times that this mechanical section of the machine is going to run to get the last stack of paper all the way delivered, right? So if I set this to, like, let's say I set it to 1 or 2, when this runs out of paper up here, and we complete one cycle down here, we might have several sets of paper throughout the machine, and it's going to stop it. So basically, we want this to be set so that all of the last sets of paper make it into the tray after this is empty. Okay. If I set it for 20, it's going to empty this, and it's going to go. We need to set that for the least amount of time possible, right? So 5 cycles. Now that can change if you're doing narrower paper, right? So that's where you would probably change that. If you're doing 8.5, 11, you could probably leave it set for 5 for the life of the machine. This shows us if we have any faults on the machine. That's pretty simple. What else do we have here? Setup screen 1. Maintenance screen is locked out. It's nothing super secret in there, and the password is just 123. But there's really nothing in there that we need to poke around with. Okay. There's a bunch of stuff that for us when we come work on the machine we might want to look at. Okay, we can see the status of a bunch of switches and sensors and things like that. Really nothing in day-to-day operation that you need to poke around with. Typically, if you guys have a problem with the machine and you call and talk to one of us techs, we might say, hey, open up that screen that shows us all the switches and look for this sensor. Is that sensor on or off right now? And then you can, it's not really something you're going to be in there poking around with. Right. I think that pretty much covers all the important stuff in this area. We don't want to mess with that. PLC inputs, you don't want to mess with that. Alarm sound, you don't want to turn that off. Your screen. There's really nothing in there that you guys want to mess around with. It's not like we're holding any secrets back. There's no secret limiter on there, so we run the machine slower or something crazy. So that covers most of the important stuff in the screens. Some of that stuff we'll come back and play with as we're trying to figure things out. So
I'll take the other side.
And there's also a piece over on this side.
perfect. So there's also 2 mechanical locks. Okay, these locks right here need to be flipped up. But I will say that you guys run a 15-inch die. You can put a 20 or maybe 22-inch die in here. So if you look, this lock doesn't even touch the die, right? But you do have to lift it out of the way because it'll crash into it. But the one on the non-op side over here is never anywhere close to your die, so you really don't have to flip that one up or pull the die out. Okay. there is your die removal handle, okay, and this end of the die is threaded, okay, and that's where this is going to go. I'm not going to pull it out yet because we got to go around to the back side for a minute. So on the back side, there is one Allen screw that's holding the die in. Okay. Now, this is important because this is how we change the position of that die. This is like our micro adjustment. So this knob controls this position of the die. So if I unscrew this and I don't pay attention where this knob's at, that thing goes spinning all the way around, then I put the die back in, I could have in theory moved the die, which changes the holes on our sheet, right? So when I take that Allen screw out, this is important. Hold on to that knurled knob with one hand and take the screw out with the other so you're not spinning that all the way around, right? So hold the knob, loosen the screw. Make sure your knob isn't spinning. If you learned anything today, that's important. Okay? So the position of that controls where our die is. Now we can pull the die out. So the die should pull out without any major resistance. It's heavy, so I mean it's not gonna like head over the head. Okay. So here's our die. Here's what it looks like. This is, I believe, the 4-to-1 die, and it looks like you have one of the pins pulled out. I'm not sure if that's in an area where the paper is actually landing or not, but when we set up punches, so this 4-to-1, sometimes the way it works out, we can't make those margins on the outside look nice with the pins in the position they're in. Sometimes we have to take one pin out at the end and then readjust so that we get a nice even margin here, right? So with all of our pins in, you can imagine we can only split what that little margin is there, okay? So if we want to create a perfectly even punch, we're going to end up with a weird size margin. So by taking one pin out and adjusting everything, we can get nice even margins. If everything is perfect and ideal, that margin on the end, okay, should be exactly the same as our margin in between the punches, or slightly less. Now, that starts to become really important when we go to coiling, because sometimes to make it look aesthetically nice, we take a pin out and our margin gets too fat, okay? So if that margin on the outside ends gets significantly wider than what's in between those punches, we're gonna have a hard time getting the coil through there, right? So we're running a 4-to-1 coil. That means we have 4 coils in an inch, and the distance between the coil, you know, as it kind of curls around, isn't going to be much bigger than that amount, right? So if we have a big fat margin out here, we got to get that coil that's only this wide into that big section, right? So that gets tricky. So your 4-to-1 looks great. 3-to-1 is a little bit trickier. Here's a 3-to-1 that you guys punched, and this explains exactly what I was talking about. Our margin out here is a little bit wider than the margin in between our holes. But if we put the pin back in and readjust, we end up with a really tiny little paper thin margin. Now, that becomes a problem because when we deliver, our sheet takes it around that big set of rollers and comes down like this, it likes to dog ear the corners, and they're real thin. So in this case, with our 3-to-1, we're kind of choosing our battle. Do we want the paper to stack really nicely in the punch, or do we want to fight a little bit on the coil master? Ideally, we would, if you took this piece of paper and you shaved 1/8 of an inch off it and readjusted so that that little margin on the sides was exactly the same as that, it would save us some battles on the coiling machine. But then you're not using 11-inch wide paper. You gotta shave all, so who's gonna cut all your 11-inch books down anyway? It's gonna start getting weird. So how about on the 11-inch side? Is that a little bit shorter on the 11-inch side? Yeah. Yeah. Those are 8.5, 11 for sure. So yeah, in theory, if you guys, did a whole run of 20,000 books and the customer doesn't mind, and you could actually run it like 1/8 of an inch shorter in that 11-inch direction, well, that would help us get those margins right. So I know this is kind of a long speech about margins and stuff, but I'm not just trying to teach you how to run this machine. I'm trying to help you guys through that whole process of making a big batch of these books, and this is where it really comes down to. Like I said, we set it up originally so we had slightly narrower margins, which was nice over here, but when we delivered sheets down there into that tray, especially on the text weight paper, right, it comes down and it's kind of a violent process landing down in there, especially the faster you run. And you like to, these corners get really weak and they like to fold over. So by making it a little wider, we got rid of that problem, but then we kind of created a little bit of a problem. Okay? So I know that's a long rabbit trail there, but it is important. So, back to the actual die. So these pins are removable. If you need to take a pin out to adjust it so that you can get your margins where you want, you can take this top section of the die out and grab each individual pin and take it out. The pins in this die, I won't take the die apart today, but the pins in this die, I don't know if any of you guys have taken them apart before, but they're different lengths, okay? And that's because, you can imagine, it takes a lot of force to push that die through a stack of paper, even if only punching 10 sheets. So one of the ways that they help that process be a little easier on the machine is they make the pins, they're kind of shaped like a zigzag, right? So let's say you have 5 different lengths of pins. Now, if we have 5 different lengths of pins, then it's only punching through 1/5 of that at a time, right? So it's like punch, 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 punch. And it saves, the amount of force you need on the machine to punch through. I just lifted that up a little bit, so now my die is all goofed up. We can fix that. So when you send these out to get sharpened and get back, the die company or the company that sharpens them for you actually has to kind of remove all those pins, sharpen each one individually, and then put them all back in. And then they, you've got a lifespan there. They're going to get shorter over time. So. Now, if you look here, see this felt pad in here? When we oil the die, lubricate the die, that's where we lubricate it. Okay? So to lubricate the die, you need to pull the die out, set it on a table like this. You don't want to do what I did and lift this up because, like I said, now my die is not lined up and I'm going to have to fix that. But this is where you're going to soak with oil. That felt pad. It should be saturated, but not like oozing. Okay? So, what's that? I do it along both sides. Okay? So, you can get in there with an oiler, and the type of oil you use isn't real critical. You can just use some normal 3-in-1 oil, whatever we're using out there at the shop. We got an oil bottle for presses or whatever. You can just kind of saturate both sides of that. Okay, and then you will probably see on your first handful of stacks that get punched, kind of a dirty oil stain around the holes. It shouldn't just stay there. be able to run a small lift of paper and clean right up. Okay? So,
I did. If you want to check it again, there's ask him.
it's going to take a minute, but I might as well just show you.
The receptionist. Where Brian is.
No, I know where I'll make up for it some other way. But,
Thank you.
if you lift this up and you pull all those pins out of there, really the only way to fix it is to take it off and push each into the contact. It sucks, I know, but yeah, if you can find me an oil bottle, we can do it. I'll let you guys do it. Some of this stuff you guys aren't going to remember, but these machines are made overseas, obviously, right? We didn't build this lovely thing in America. But the dies themselves are made in the USA. Okay? So why does that matter to us? Well, it matters because these screws are American. And that'll get you some time. Because you assume the whole thing is, I hate when they mix and match, but on the die itself, these bolts and stuff in here are American. So keep that in mind. Like I said, I don't really want to do this, but we can do it real quick. This will happen. It happened to me all the time. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever had this happen to you where you pull the pins out too far and then you can't get them.
That happened to me once, and it wasn't too bad. I was able to look, it was kind of skewed, so I just got it from a look and gently brought it back down to where it was touching down.
Explain to me real quick what went wrong.
Well, basically what went wrong was these pins, okay, I pulled the top of this up too far, and now my pins are pulled out of those two sections. So I need to put each individual pin back in. Like I said, hopefully you guys don't do that wrong.
It's just like when the hole puncher in Depot would break.
I just hit it.
Okay, fix you.
Yeah, the one at Depot is just ram it in there and pray it stays.
Can't believe that thing's still together. Maybe it's not.
Okay. That went back together pretty good. Yeah, we should be able to get in there still.
Careful, Zane's got a gun, it's not pretty good.
You're an artist.
You should have that thing pop up on the screen that tells you when to lubricate. I would go by that. But if you're in here taking it apart or something, then it's not going to hurt it to squirt some oil in there. Just be mindful. Don't throw some. If you only have one book left, you needed to make your 10,000 piece order, and it's 3 o'clock on Friday. Don't pump that thing full of oil and run the last book you have through, because it's probably going to be.
You will have a bad time.
Keep in mind that this part of the die is what sets the position for the die in this direction. So you want to make sure that's nice and tight, and you're going to have to change that. Probably going to have to play with that adjustment when you change between two different dies. You know what I mean? So we'll play with that a little bit. So I'm going to put this lever back. Even though, like I said, that one doesn't really touch the die, but you can slide it in and out with that one out. Now I'm going to go back to screen. Now that we've changed the die, we're back in. You're going to hit die, change, confirm, enter, and the machine should do some moving around until it's happy. We'll see if it's made it all back into the right position or not. I think so. I think we're all right.
Get the correct side guide. On the screen.
So, most of the time, you guys are going to be set up for 11-inch paper. So we won't get too crazy with adjusting a bunch of stuff. So I don't see you guys running anything real small anytime soon. But we talked about these, right? So these are kind of, call them in-feed guides. And those should be set so that our 11-inch wide paper fits in there. Doesn't have a lot of wiggle room. But it's also not tight. Right now it's tight. I was messing with it.
Yeah, I think it's
Let me
kind
move
of
the
set
table
it.
so they can, so you can get a visual of the knob there.
So we can open that up, close it.
So there's a knob down where it's down there on the left that he's messing with to move the gates in and out.
I'm happy with that about right there. It's a little hard to judge exactly how tight you want it to be. In theory, you can run this a little bit sloppier because we should be jogging up here and tightening everything up, right? So that's really going to control the position of the holes in the paper. So if we're a little sloppy out here, we should still be okay, right? So we don't have to worry about trying to register the sheet super tight in the feed section because it has another jog section out here before it punches. But you still don't want it to go super crooked or something like that. But you don't have to worry about trying to get it perfect in this area. Okay, so now this whole mechanism here, obviously if you have it in the right position, you shouldn't have to be changing it a bunch. But it is a little tricky to get it square because it just slides on these rails. There's nothing that keeps it from going wonky like this. And I wouldn't say it's super critical, but you know, trying to get it as square as we can. It's tricky to do that. The best thing to do is to look down at the stack of paper and use that as our square edge and use that as a reference against this, right? Because there's not really a good way to tell where this is, because it can easily get a little crooked on it. There's some Sharpie marks on here, and those seem to be pretty good, so we're going to go with that. Try to anyway. So this is kind of critical because the way that this feeds paper, it has to come out and grab that stack of paper. So if this is not here, it'll just push the paper back and grab it. You know what I mean? So that's why we need to have that little stop behind the stack. And then these guides here are really just trying to keep this stack as square as we can. But again, if everything else is working nicely, we can be a little sloppy in the feeder because we're going to register the sheet up here. Okay? So that's how I would load it. You can put that other tray in here and then load the tray underneath it like you guys do. The only trick with that is if you have both trays in there and you're covering up this sensor, it won't let you bring this table down. So I just yanked that one out for now.
It's like a light sensor.
Basically, it's like a light sensor. Basically, it
Yep.
basically just detects how light or dark it is.
Yep.
And what I found is if let's say you're halfway through running a stack and there's an issue, and the bottom tray has been pulled up, it'll let you drop it to a certain distance, but it won't drop beyond that until
If your other tray is up in here, you've got a little bit of room to go up and down. Yeah. Yep, that's just an optical sensor. Yeah, so it's either, if you cover it, it's on, and you uncover it, it's off, or whatever. So. So up in this section, set up for 11 inches wide, these two outside skis, okay, are adjustable in this direction, okay? And the point of those is we want to try to control the outside edge of the sheets as best we can, okay? So if we don't have a ton of room to move them around, but if we move them in as much as we can towards the center, then we're leaving a couple inches on each outside edge, and that gives us more chances to curl up and get hung up on something. So the better we can control that outside edge, especially on this paper that's curly, right, the better off we are. So these are adjustable, but I don't see you guys move them around a lot, especially if you're running 11 inches wide. Nothing else in here is really adjustable. The position of this and all of this stuff should be set. And if you have trouble, something gets bent or messed up, then you would have to kind of reset it, and it's kind of a little bit tricky. There are some paint marks on here as reference, so you got to have a heck of a crash to get one of those to not work correctly. So I'll manually jog it for a second so we can kind of see how this works. Cooperate with me. Okay. So our stabber comes out, stabs. Now it's actually coming out early, or grabbing the sheet when it really shouldn't, because this stack is so curly. But it's going to come out. This grabber here is going to close down. Okay. Right now, this set of wheels has a fairly good sized gap between those belts. And once this gets up into here, those should start closing down and grabbing the sheet. And then this should lift off and let go of the sheet. Okay. See how those came down and then this started coming up? That's exactly how we want it set. If we start moving this stuff around, we can get that timing screwed up. That is how we want it to be set. There's not really anything specific procedure for setting it. There's no timing marks or anything like that. You kind of just have to judge that as soon as that small little grabber is starting to release, you want to see the wheels coming down. So there's always something controlling our paper. Okay, so this is where we'll spend some time up in this area here. So once we get our sheet of paper or a stack of paper up into this area, I lifted these out so that there's not really anything moving the sheet along, but you can see the gap that we have in between the table and this paper. I want it to move around, but I don't want it to have a ton of room, okay? So you can adjust the height of these skis. Right here, this knob, it's just manual, so you're gonna loosen it up and move it up and down and just get the feel right. And then if you wanna move these skis in or out this way, that's what these locks right here for, and we can set those. Right now, honestly, I could probably move this one out this way a little bit. I like where this one's at a little bit better, but I also move that sheet of paper around, so I don't really know exactly where it's at. But it doesn't have to be an exact amount. but as close to the edge of the sheet as we can get it, so that we're controlling the corners. So we have this lifted right now, so it's a little hard to judge, but when this enters this area here, let's see if it'll let me do this or if it's going to try and pull things through there. I'm just inching it in. I don't really care about where the paper's at this way. I'm trying to get these outside joggers in. Okay. So they shouldn't, when these guys start coming up and they're about in this position, these should be the farthest in. Okay. And we're a little sloppy right now. Let's see if it's going to go in a little bit more. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's set pretty good. So this is about how I would want it set. Okay. I have a tiny bit of movement. I'll let you guys come in here and play with this. I have a tiny bit of movement in this direction and a tiny bit of movement in that direction. I want it to be as tight as I can get it without it being tight, if that makes sense, right?
Still want the paper to be on the pass through.
I need the paper to move a tiny bit, but I want it to be tight. So, yeah.
The skis.
Yep.
I'm noticing this one's really low, but that one's got much more than
Yeah. Not really. They're kind of set a little bit wonky right now. We'll probably play with those a little bit and set them a little bit better. This guy can be brought down some on that side, stuff like that. Like I said, they're not super critical, but also this one does have a sensor over here. So if we go like that, it should trip that sensor and that should shut the machine off. So if you have like multiple sets that make it up into here and jam up, that should set that off. So once you guys get in here and feel this back and forth is like perfect. I can feel a tiny bit of movement, but not so much that it would screw up my books. But I don't really want these to crash into this and buckle my sheet like that. So I'm buckling like that, I'm going to cause two problems. One, I'm going to get a mark back here where these actually crush the sheet, and then I'm going to get 6 little marks in the front where it's pushing against those. So if I can get it to be tight but not actually like smushing it, then that's kind of ideal. So that position there is ideal. If you guys want to get in there and wiggle this around and kind of feel, side to side we're a little bit sloppy, but for now we'll leave it the way it is. And we'll actually slide it in and out on this shaft. Okay, so it's kind of tricky because you kind of got to get the machine up at like top dead center if you want to just slide it up to the paper. So it's a little bit of a, there's no scale on here or anything. You kind of just going to have to set it by feel. But in theory, if you're running 8.5, you should be able to set it and not have to mess with it a whole lot.
Yeah.
But that's what we're looking for. We want to make sure. So if we see the holes on our sheet moving around in this direction, then we're obviously sloppy in here, right? And then if we see them moving around in this direction, we must be sloppy this way. Because this is where the magic happens. If it registers all the sheets really nice and tightly right here, we should get really nice consistent punches every single time. Because the die's not moving around. So if we can control where the paper comes in at the same position every time, we should get really nice punches. Which, the nicer the punches are, the better success we have farther down the line, right? So this is really important. So if we're happy with where we're jogging, which for now we'll call that happy. It's a little loose out here. We might adjust that. But when we adjust these two out here, okay, this one's easy, okay, because we can slide it up. We either slide it in or slide it out. The side joggers get a little bit trickier because we can actually set one jogger a millimeter back this way and the other jogger a millimeter this way. And we just move the position of the whole sheet. right? So when we start adjusting where the holes are at on our sheet, there's really kind of two ways to do it. We can adjust the position of the die and move that back and forth, or we could move both of these joggers one direction or the other and move the sheet. I would move the die. I would try to get the joggers where I want them and then move the die back and forth. But in some cases, when this jogs in, I should see them kind of evenly touching the sheet. If I can watch it run and I see where it's like hitting the one side of the sheet and pushing it to the other one, and then that one's pushing, you know what I mean? Then that's no good. I really want it to come in evenly and not be pushing the whole stack of paper one direction or the other. But you can fiddle around with that and change the position of the holes by adjusting these joggers. They do give you some marks on these ones to kind of indicate where to set them. It's a little bit tricky to follow their marks here, and they're not the most accurate. But it does give you at least a point of reference, right? So that's what these scales here are for. There's no scale for this one, but there is scales for these ones. And that's probably really all the important stuff to do with these. Like I said, we might adjust those and try and tighten that up a touch. We'll see. The next thing to look at is this here. When, you know what we might do, let's see if I can find. Let's take this guy off for a minute so we can see. Okay, so this set of rollers. This one isn't touching paper. We don't really care where those are at. This set here, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. We just want them somewhere in the middle there. Okay, these ones are spring loaded. That's kind of just keeping pressure on those belts to move the sheets through this area. So this one isn't super critical. Somewhere in the middle here, you can move that one around without really affecting a whole lot. But this one is critical. Okay, and what we want is we want the tail edge of that sheet, when it's all the way up against that headstop, to be just on the outside of the radius of that wheel, right? So it's just past the very crotch of it, so that this can spin and it's not moving, it's not hitting the paper when it's all the way in there. But also we want this belt to drive it in as far as we possibly can, right? So a little tricky to see, I know, but you can loosen this and adjust this back and forth. But this one,
I have a scribe if you need one.
yeah, this one here, the way this is made, there are kind of some marks here already, so we should be able to get back to where we were. If you watch these wheels, when I tighten this up, they like to move big time. So it's a little tricky to set the position of those in the right spot and then crank it down. So you kind of gotta use your judgment to get them in the right spot, and it's gonna be a little trial and error, okay? So, like I said, you can't just move them up to the right spot, crank it down, and it stays right there, because they have a tendency to move forward on you as you tighten. See that? And so, all right, we're close. Way that we're gonna adjust the gap in here if we ever need to. We shouldn't have to mess with this stuff a lot, but just so you're aware of what this does. The gap in between these two belts can be adjusted by that screw and that lock nut. So you loosen the lock nut, back the screw off or turn it in a little bit, and then that would actually put more pressure between these two belts in this area. This area here is spring loaded, so we don't have to worry about that. Really having to do with here. Again, it's set right now, so we shouldn't have to worry about it too much. Let's see how this thing will cooperate with this lifted. These jog and these jog, okay? At that point, then it should punch the paper And so if we inch this thing along, that was us punching the paper. It should lift the die back up, release all of those, and then see that set of wheels right here? They were up, and now they're slowly coming down, and that's what's going to drive it out of that section. See how they're coming down? And then once they hit that belt, that's what's going to drive it through there. So I know I keep talking about this, but remember that when we want sheets of paper to go through here nicely, we have to control both the top and the bottom. Right, so if we break these loose and adjust that so that when it comes down all the way, it doesn't touch the top of that paper, then the only thing driving that little stack of paper through is these two belts on the bottom. And then we can shingle that stack out. We don't want to do that. So they're trying throughout this whole machine to control that stack and keep it as one. Okay? And really, the most important part is to get it into the die section evenly. So those are going to come down, they drive the sheet out, and then we're going to enter this area out here. And at this point, we're really just trying to deliver it as nicely as we can. Come through here, it's going to wrap around these big rollers, it's going to go into our tray down there, and then it's going to all jog. So I'll run it the rest of the way through. Yeah, we're pulling some junk in there. It's alright, we fix that. There. Okay. So, if it's all working correctly, that's how it should work. I think this curly paper is going to be long. Like that? Yeah. So, if it jams up like that, and you're running live work and you need that thing to stop, you're going to have to hit the E-stop. That'll stop it right away. Hitting the stop button will run that 5 cycles or whatever we have set in there before it stops. Right. So if you got live work in there and you're mangling up a bunch of books, you're going to hit that E-stop.
One of the things the machine also does when you hit that E-stop is it lowers the in-feed tray just a little bit so that it gives you restart time to catch any issues and helps, just gives you that little extra insurance.
Pull that crap out of there. So what it did is it grabbed some big old stacks. Okay, so I'd say what caused that is our curly paper, and I'll show you guys why that would do that. Right. So here's our sensor. Remember I talked about this sensor. This is what looks at where the paper's at. Right. So this sensor over here tells the table to stop. Like, there's no more, can't go anymore, that's the end, that's the table, stop. This right here looks for the stack of paper, right? It sees the stack of paper, when the sensor's happy, it stops there, and then from there, the machine is going to increment up whatever amount that we told it to pick. Okay? But in our case, like this, we have some wonky paper, and that paper is way curly, especially on that side, right? So let me lower this down a little bit. Right here, where our sensor's at, okay, versus the lead edge of the paper where that's actually going to grab, 2 totally different heights, okay? So especially on that first chunk, when it comes all the way up, it's going to make this sensor happy. But we could have another 1/4 inch of paper up there that's in the way. So like you said before, with this curly paper, we might be better off to run curl down. But then we kind of create the opposite problem. Depends on how this acts. This is pretty flat. This should be better. But you can actually, if you had a big giant stack of paper that was curly like that, you can create the opposite problem, where this over here comes up to the height of the paper, but the actual lead edge of the paper is still diving down, right? So, try to go. Yeah. More stabbering. Bring this up. That should cooperate a little better now. All right, now let's try running. That could, a lot of different stuff can cause that problem. One of them is if our paper is really staticky, that can kind of cause that problem where it likes to, because just the friction of that sheet on top of it being pulled away might grab the next one. So yeah, that might just be something we have to fight a little bit. Depends on, you know, the paper we're running.
Oh, I've noticed that too.
Yeah. Because that can cause, like you were saying, the problem where if we end up in this area here, where we have our stack of paper, but we also have a couple that are shingled out there, then you get screwed up in the punching area. So when these sheets of paper get up here into this jogging area, I'll manually jog some up in there. What you want to watch for is when this sheet of paper makes it up into this area and when it closes in, remember I was talking about how we can actually set those joggers so they're not even and it actually will push the stack over one way or the other. The way to reference that is if you watch it in this area, I kind of will look at something along the sheet and I should see a feed in, and then when it jogs, I shouldn't see, like if I reference like this black line here, I shouldn't see as it jogs that whole paper getting shifted like that, then getting punched. I should see it pretty much stay in that area. Now it might move a couple of millimeters depending on how we're set up, but I don't want to see it getting moved one way or the other by a big amount.
So it shouldn't move more than like 1/8 of an inch.
Yeah. Yep. So let's watch a couple of these stacks make it up into this area and kind of watch that stack visually, okay, where it delivers in. And am I seeing the stack getting moved one way or the other when it jogs? So I will manually run it so it goes slow, see if it'll cooperate. See right there? Yeah. That's exactly, that can cause us some problems. It might actually cause a problem right here. That one sort of made itself worse, but still wasn't ideal. But remember what we're watching. We're looking to see if our stack of paper is getting pushed a long ways one way or the other. That one did not jog nicely. The other thing that's tricky too is to kind of reference how well it works when you're just doing it manually. Sometimes it doesn't really, not a good reference for how it would actually run.
Does that explain why sometimes they're punched like in the middle of the page?
Yeah. trying to show there was the paper moving in this direction. We kind of saw some other problems in while we were doing that. But I think it's pretty good. Like I said, it's going to move a tiny bit. You're probably not going to get it exactly perfect, but you don't want to see it pushing the sheet a huge amount one there. So. I think all that. Yeah, why don't we load up some more?
Don't have to fix them. There's no.
The guides, I can open them up.
Left or right?
I don't know. I have to play with it to see.
How's that?
With adjusting the guide left and right, that's one of the biggest issues that I have with this machine. Is I can usually get it like going this way really good. I can never seem to get them lined up right.
You want more?
Yeah, left and right.
Oh no, that's fine for now. Yeah, that is
For this, like the getting these lined up.
so. It is tricky to get those right, and even though they put this scale on here, it doesn't really give you the best.
It's not. It's a rough estimate. It's not an actual hard numbers thing.
Yeah. In theory, we should be able to jog everything in as far as it goes, and then with some paper in here, and then loosen these up and make sure they're tight against our stack. We can even try that, but it's a little bit tricky because we have to get these in all the way, and it's a little bit. We got to kind of visually look at it and say, okay, are they in as far as they go? So. Now let's see if we can get a stack of paper up in there. Alright, is everybody clear down there?
Yeah.
So we might have to adjust this. I'm not sure how much it picked right here, but I don't really want to be able to slide this around under these belts. When that stuff is all set correctly, I want that to be, but I don't know if that picked the right amount in that one because it was the first one out, so I don't want to adjust it based on that. But let's look at our jogging here. Okay, I think that should be in all the way. Now, in theory, we should be able to set one to the position we want it at, and then we should be able to take the other one and slide it right up against it, basically, just to fuzz off the sheet. But I would say if you have to play with the joggers and you have to change the position of them, I would get the position of them so that they're jogging nicely and you are not moving the sheet a lot, and then go to the die and get the die set. You don't want to do is spend 10 minutes getting your die exactly where you want it and then realize that it's not quite jogging good, and then you go mess with your joggers, and then because you got to remember when we start moving this, a tiny little amount makes a huge difference. You can really see it on those punches. So it's not real forgiving. But basically, you're going to jog these in all the way, and then check our position this way. Let me make sure that we're in all the way. Hold on. Okay. I think we're in all the way now. Okay, our die is actually punching. Yeah, so it's hard to reference it. There is a little bit of slop out here. You could.
That one actually looks good.
Is that one tight?
Yeah, that one looks
I'd loosen
tight.
that one up.
So just so everybody knows, if you need to turn these, you can lift these up and turn them to get them into an angle where you want to, so that they're easier to turn for you.
Yeah. So.
Back it off a little.
Nope, that should be fine. It's tight because we're smushed in the die right now, so I can't really tell for sure. But, yeah, setting the position of these joggers is tricky. It's a little trial and error. You kind of you're gonna waste some stock doing it, and it's gonna be a little bit tricky. But set these and get this set. Now, like I said, you shouldn't have to go in there and mess with them a lot. But if something goes really wrong and you need to adjust these, then get these set. You don't want to see your paper moving around a lot when they're jogged in, and then we'll adjust the position of the die accordingly. So let's close this down. Let's run a handful through here, and we'll look at where we're at as far as position of the die. I don't know if this will cooperate or not. We'll try it. If I get out to about there, I should be able to see it decent. Okay. So,
Here, I'll move so everybody can see where.
this is all just junk. If we're jogging good, and we want to move our holes, this is where we're going to actually go to that set screw, or the Allen and the knurled knob here, and move it in or out. And remember, we're not moving the paper, we're moving the die around the paper, right? So if we want the die, the holes to come this way, then we have to move the die this way or whatever. So in this case, we're close. The die could go towards the non-op side by a fuzz, only to get rid of this tiny little nick right there. So we could try to get rid of that. Not sure if we'll be able to, but we can try. Yeah, let's try and figure out how to see if we can get rid of that little nick on the outside edge there. I wouldn't really hold that as, you might want to do is look at a whole stack of them, because you're not necessarily going to control the sheet perfect. So if we want to move the die, we obviously need to move the die that way a little bit. So we were going to have to take this cover off. Somebody wants to jump in there and mess with it. Take that cover off. We can leave that one. That's it. You're going to take, is there a sheet of paper up in here? No, we're good. Okay. So now take that.
Usually this Allen key.
Yep. So hold on to that knurled knob, loosen up that screw. You don't have to take it all the way out.
So how I do it is I use my bottom finger around here, and I use my thumb, and I bridge over to the block in here. I bridge it over into the block in there. So then I can get the Allen. So I have a flat surface to brace against. I get it locked, get the Allen wrench in, and then I break it loose, and then I kind of take it off loosen it with my fingers, and it gives you. So is it this way towards me, that way away?
You know, I don't know. I haven't adjusted one in a long time, so we might have to trial and error this one. But what
Let's
I
try
do is,
that.
if you loosen that up, and then just kind of reference how far you're moving that now. You know, so I would try and pick a certain amount, kind of grab it and say, okay, I rotated a quarter or a half turn or something, and just kind of keep reference which way you went. Because we're either going to make it better or we're going to make it worse. So
basically, I just moved it like a 1/16 that way. So just a smidge.
okay. So go ahead and lock it all back together, and when you lock it in, make sure it doesn't spin at all.
Yep. And then that's all you got to do. It doesn't need to. So to use a quote from my dad, you don't need to make it gorilla tight, which is just impossible to move. Like you gorilla tight your lug nuts on your car.
All right, I'm going to let this rip for a minute. See what it does.
And one more time, did you do it clockwise or counterclockwise?
So I turned it counterclockwise a 1/16 of an inch. So that made counterclockwise made the die go that way.
Yep. So we need to go the opposite way.
So
So undo what we did, plus a little more.
Yep.
Okay.
So with this thing, if you turn it counterclockwise, it pushes it away. So if it's counterclockwise, is pushing it away. Clockwise is towards you. So I'm kind of doing half the job here.
You're right. If you guys know how to do it, then that's all the better. All right. So if you want, we should be able to just hit start and let it run for a minute and see what it does.
It does take a couple of cycles for it to adjust to get the new adjustment.
Yeah. What does it say there? Is it unhappy about something?
I think it just went 5 spaces without grabbing anything.
All right. What do we got here? Trouble. The other thing you can do, let's have a peek at the last few that came out and see if we're consistent or not. Yeah, at least we're pretty consistent. So our die needs to go that way a little bit more.
Okay, so I did like an 1/8 of a turn to the right. Where was that? Hit start, Colton.
Yeah, let's let this thing go for a second. Oops.
Oh.
Our delivery is kind of a mess down here. That was me.
Yeah, it's not grabbing and then it's grabbing. I think this, if you push closer, this isn't resting on the case.
Here you can actually kind of see where the oil spots are on the paper here. Now the oil's actually getting into the die now.
I think you'll have to go counterclockwise.
So I went clockwise and it pushed it
This way.
away, and then just break it loose. Why is the top sheet of the plastic written in tongues? I think I got it.
Where is that? How's that? That's close. Yeah, I mean.
So usually what I
that's
do
kind
is
of
I try
where
to
we
clear
started, but you could also try and bump it a tiny bit. You're really close on these ones though. On that 4-to-1 die, you don't have a ton of room to play around with it, but the die could go towards you a tiny bit more.
Just a literally just
Yeah.
a touch.
Yep. Okay. Let's see if we can this check out. Yeah, now we went the other way.
Went too far.
Yeah, it half of that back again. But like I said, on this one, you're fighting it, and sometimes it's not that critical. You might have a little nick on one end or the other. That's cosmetic stuff. That's up to you guys. You know how perfect you need that to be. Right. I think most of the time you use the Coil Master, you're running the 3-to-1 die though. So you can see when you stop and start this a lot, it gets unhappy, and especially when I'm like manually jogging stuff around, stuff ends up in funny spots. When it just kind of runs consistently, you'll have a lot better, but when you're stopping and starting a bunch, you get all kinds of funny stuff happening. I think if we loaded it up with nice paper and hit go, it would just run like a champ, but this curly paper is also doesn't help, yeah. See, like that right there when it did that.
Let me go grab a ream of paper. Excuse me.
So I don't know if you saw, see how that one set that I said was no good, it didn't make it all the way up here, and that joggers kind of came up and hit it. That really, well, the brush might help if I put the brush back on because it'll help hold it down, but I think part of that problem is the distance between these belts and these belts down here. That gap is a little bit big. If I back that screw off a little bit, I should be able to tighten that up. It should help drive my paper in there a little bit better. So I might adjust that a little bit. For now, I'm just going to put this brush back up.
No, these palletized and they're flat. These have been sitting out so long.
Are they just gonna write the job off as a loss? Or ship what we got and then that's it?
Until the next spring. We don't really know if it happens or not. I don't think we take a couple books and wouldn't hurt anything.
Oh, you need it to now?
Alright, I put some better paper in here.
Okay. Alright, we'll put our brush back on.
Yeah, that looks way better.
So we won't worry about, so you guys understand how to adjust the die. That's really what you have. As long as you're happy with where it's jogging, okay, and get that all happy first, then you want to adjust the position of your holes, you're going to do it on the die back there. Okay. So we won't worry about adjusting that anymore for now. We'll probably switch to, I don't know, we might switch to 3-to-1. I don't know if we really need to. But, let's see.
I know the brake spring books are much 3-to-1.
Yeah, that's the big job, right?
Yeah, that's one of the big jobs.
And you guys will see it is where that stuff gets run, how long it sits, all that stuff will make a huge difference. I know before some of the job was getting run at another shop that was coming off a web. Sometimes the paper that comes off a web can be more difficult than some of the sheet fed paper, but sometimes it works great. Sometimes you can put it in a nice humidified room like this and it flattens right out. Sometimes it's curly as hell. And then sometimes too what happens is on a web, if they're running a wide web, okay, and depending on how they're stacking those sheets, you may see that let's say it's creating 2 stacks of 8.5, 11 off that web. Sometimes the one you can go through a skid of paper and it works like a dream, and then you're actually running paper that came off the other side of the web might act completely different off the same roll of paper. So fighting curl and static and some of that stuff can be tricky. In that case, sometimes it helps to go up on the thickness that you grab each time just to give it a little more body, but then also that can create other problems.
We'll see if their job came off the web.
The big one that's getting run.
It's some of it's here.
Oh, is it those books that we all had to cut all the spines off of? What was the final width for that, by the way? No one. Okay, so no one's supposed to have anything. Okay.
Similar to this guy, right? They're getting perfect bound, and then you're going to whack the spine off, and then that way you got the cover and everything all jammed. Yeah. That might actually work all right. I don't know. Now the only other thing is if this is an example of an actual one from the run, keep in mind that this was run, looks like it was run offset, and they were folded signatures down and then made your book blocks, and it doesn't look like they face trimmed that. So, and not a huge deal, but you can see the length of those sheets are different a little bit. So just keep that in mind. When you go to
When we cut it, you got to make sure it's super square.
Yeah, you already are going to have because you're obviously you're not going to trim both sides of it. I mean, I assume you wouldn't. No, but you got a little bit of variance there in the length of your sheet. Just keep that in mind. So that'll create different things when you jog. Even though it's a tiny amount, just keep that in mind. That stuff all plays into things as it goes along. I don't know if this is actually from that.
Yeah.
No, that's one of the books from. So if you look at the edge of the spine of that book,
Yeah.
you can actually see where the issue comes up. Like on the outside of the spine, you can see it's literally off center.
Yeah. Are they all like that?
Every single one.
Oh, that's cute. So, anyways, that'll be interesting. I'm not sure how that paper is going to act. Honestly, it should lay pretty flat after it being perfect bound like that. But I don't know. You guys will just have to play it by ear and see. My goal is to teach you all of the things that you can adjust and play with. Not necessarily how to run the job perfectly. That's a mystery based on the paper, But if you know all the things that you can go in and play with,
Figuring out how to get it to run perfectly is our job. Your job is just to get us
right. I'll give
knowledge
you the
on how
tools.
to do that.
For sure. So I'm gonna let this run for a minute and see how this operates.
We did switch it out for a different stack of paper.
Okay. we talked about adjusting the die. We talked about adjusting stuff in this section and what I would look for here as far as where it jogs and everything. The next thing that becomes really important is that it delivers down there and stacks up on that tray really nicely. That, again, is where paper is going to start to make a big difference. You can stack and stack and stack all day long, and then start another job and it stacks horribly. This stuff that's on these skids here, I can almost guarantee you it's going to stack really nicely. Looks really good on the skids. That stack of yellow paper over there, if we try to stack that up, it's probably going to stack horrible. So let's look at this stack that we just punched for a second and talk about what our options are down here. Is there a recycling area?
Yeah.
All of that stuff can go ahead and be tossed. Okay. So, first of all, you can see, now this is a little worse than I'd like, and we can try to adjust that a little bit, but see some of these marks on the spine of these books?
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Okay. This right here is probably caused by the actual little stabber, okay? And there's some things that we can adjust to make that a little bit better, but occasionally you're going to get a mark there. I mean, it has to stab into this stack of books. And then these other marks, I don't know if you can see them that well, but like that, that's probably from that head stop in the actual punching area, right? Because that paper has to come up there and land against that. The faster we go, the harder it's going to come flying up against that head stop. And if we adjust that jogger too tight, then you'll really see those marks because it's actually going to be smushing them into it. But you're always going to get some marks along that spot. By the time you make a book out of it, you never see it anyways. But just keep in mind that you'll see some marks along here.
Can you adjust to like
Let's see.
when it starts to cut that thicker paper?
What's that now?
It'll start marking like cutting through that paper.
Yeah, I have seen it. So that's the tricky part is that little stabber, okay? If you really sharpen it up so it's just super sharp, it'll stab into those books and you will get less damage there. But kind of creates another problem because occasionally it has such a fine little point that like when it gets to a cover, it'll actually stab right in the middle of that sucker and split it open, right? So you're fighting a battle between having that blunt tip there that kind of stabs in between the stack and then having it really sharp, which works great on the text weight paper, but then sometimes on the covers, if it hits one of those just right, you can actually kind of split it open. So you're kind of always fighting that battle a little bit, just the way that feeder works. You kind of have to figure out a happy medium between that stuff. So you'll always get a little bit of marking along that center section, and then from those fingers up there, and then in the other direction, you'll always probably see a little bit of marking along here because we're jogging it down here. You loosen up the joggers down here so you don't kind of crash into it, then you don't get it nice and stacked. And the nicer we can stack this stuff up, the more cooperative it'll be over there on the coiler. So, but like I said, on this stuff you're not really having this problem. But if you have a problem where sheets like to fold under and you get those little dog ears like that, obviously that can be a big problem because then you go over here and the coil's not going to go through there when you got one sheet that's screwed up, right? So we want a nice clean stack.
So usually when these tend to dog ear, it's not just a small amount that dog ears. It does something like that.
Yeah. So the trick to watch for that is okay, if we get one that a sheet in the stack somewhere randomly, it looks like that. Did that happen up there, or did it happen after it got punched, right? So it either happened up earlier in the machine and it got punched that way, then we wouldn't see punches in that folded back part. But if we do see punches, then it probably happened down here somewhere. And so now we're going to look at the jogging area for a minute, and I'll show you how I would set that stuff. It's already set pretty good the way it is now, so I probably won't change it a bunch. I know it's tough to get dialed in just right, but in those screens, so if you want to step in, and if you want to go to setup screen 2, and then
I'll start from the front screen. So setup 1, setup 2,
and then you have that one that says pile jog screen.
this one.
Yep. And that's how we can actuate those things in and out.
So if you hit
Yep.
in, it pushes the pistons. So if you think you want to head it down to that end. So when I hit the button here, so I'm going to push the button, out. It fires them, and I'm going to release the button. It pushes them back in.
Okay. So go ahead and jog them in for me, please. Okay. Leave them there for a minute. So that should be tight, but not buckling my sheets, right? So I want that to be as tight as I can get it without really messing up my sheets. The tighter I can jog, the better my stack's gonna look. And then same thing in this direction, okay? Between here and here, I want that to be tight, but not smashing my sheets, right? And to adjust these ones, that's our knob on the outside out here. And those ones will move together, they're self-centering. This one here is actually this lock right here, and then that one is just moved manually. Okay. And I know we got some tape and stuff in here, like these screws and stuff that are in here. Sometimes as the stack is lowering down, you'll see a little mark there. That's why some of that tape and stuff is in there. You just, you get a mark on the sheets consistently, you just kind of got to follow it along the machine and try and figure out what lines up with it, where it came from, right? So I know before they were getting some marks from where these little screws are at, and so we put some tape on there just to kind of minimize that. But jogging them down here is kind of a violent process. It's just, you know, the way it is. Like I said, you can actually slow down or speed up those joggers with these little needle valves, and that will slow it down. I think we might even be able to set it so it jogs twice each time or something. I can't remember, but there's some different things we can adjust in the jogger section. Getting those sheets to come flying down in there nicely is a little bit tricky. So. Tomorrow when I come, if I remember, I'm going to bring some 6mm airline, and I'll fix these airlines a little bit. One of them had a big nick in it, and it was bleeding air out, so I cut it shorter and undid the zip ties up in here. So that's why it's kind of
hanging low and hanging in the way.
Yep. So I will. I don't know if I have any blue, but I have some 6mm airline. We'll try to fix that up. So yeah, besides that, down here in this section, there's not a whole lot to adjust, but getting it set right is pretty critical because we want those to have nice, clean stacks. Right now, it seems to be working, pretty good considering. Hard to judge. Like I said, paper is going to make a huge difference. Yeah. So I know it's almost lunchtime. Do you guys have any questions about anything? Anything like that?
What's that hatch for?
Really, there's nothing exciting going on in there. I don't know why they put a door in that spot and not in a lot of other spots, but it's not real. Nothing you have to get in there and mess with. Not really. Nothing too exciting. So So I'll probably cover what I would do for maintenance on this machine for a minute, and then we'll come back and talk about it for a couple minutes after lunch, and then we'll start working on the coil master itself. But unless there's any other questions or anything, if you guys want, we can try and change it and set up for a different size paper or something and break all of our adjustments, but I don't really think that's a great idea. I would leave it set up for 11 inches. That's what I would do. Yeah. Right. And the big job that's coming through is going to be 11 inches, right? So they're going to trim it a little bit on this side because you're going to trim this.
I think I helped the higher ups do like 2 test books specifically. One of them was 8.2 and one of them was like 8.3. We punched both of those to see how far we could go from the spine and have it still and not have the cracking on the front cover show as much.
So the other thing I can show you guys, see the position of these punches in this direction? That is one of those screens I was showing you here. We can actually adjust that. And we can actually get those holes out closer to the edge or farther in. But I don't find it necessary to change it really. Once you get it in the right position, I wouldn't worry about it. If you change it somewhere in the middle of a run or something, then everything on that has to get changed somewhere along the line, right? Because when this foot block sits in there, we got to get the coil right in there. So if we move the position of the holes, then everything has to get adjusted down the line. So it's not something I would adjust on the fly or anything like that, but you can change that position. Like I said, I know it's still sitting out. They might be, yeah. So maintenance, I know we're getting ready for lunch, but we'll start talking about it for a second. We'll go to lunch, come back. Just cleaning it is going to be the most helpful thing that you can possibly do. All of those cams and bearings and everything in this whole section of the machine that's mechanical, if those cams are getting built up with paper dust, it's a minute amount, but you can start to change your timing, you know? So you can imagine if you have a round cam or a cam, and where it's real critical where the position that cam follower rides at. If you add a 1/16 of an inch to that whole cam, then you just change the timing. It could be a small amount, but it still could be significant. So vacuuming out paper dust, and paper dust, you don't think of it as being abrasive, but that stuff is slightly abrasive, and if it rides on metal parts for years, it will actually wear it down, you know? So keeping just the paper dust itself vacuumed out of the machine as much as we can, I would say is the most important part of maintenance. Then second to that is trying to keep everything oiled and lubricated, but that's kind of a fine line because we don't want to go inside the bottom of that machine and drench everything in oil, because you're going to run books for one day and then you're going to have a sticky, oily, gluey mess of paper dust, and that's worse, right? So like these chains and stuff here, if we can keep them clean and like very lightly oiled, or something that's like a dry lubricant, like a spray on, like WD-40 dry spray instead. That stuff works really good on a lot of this stuff, like these chains. These chains are not sitting there just coming along all day long. That's just slowly moving up and down. So if we can keep them clean and just lightly oiled, that's perfect. The big chain that's down under here, a little trickier to see, but you only have one of the big chain drive down here. Same thing with that, just, you know, put a brush on your vacuum and suck the paper dust off it, and you put something on there that's like a light oil. ideally that chain would be a little more drenched in a thicker oil, but in this situation where you have all this paper dust, I'd rather have it something dry on there because it's just going to build up with goop if we don't. And then
I know there's also one behind the main cover on the back.
yeah, that one shouldn't be as bad because it's covered up at least. So we shouldn't be dumping a bunch of paper dust on that one as bad. And then these cams and the cam followers. So like, for example, this guy, and that is the cam follower, okay?
Okay.
And this is our cam, that's our cam follower. We want to make sure that this is clean. You don't have to get in there and scrub that off every single day. You could spend 2 hours doing that, but occasionally, I would say maybe once every couple of weeks. When you guys are running,
the rag.
yeah, when you guys are running really hard, then you might have to do it a little more often. But under normal use, you wouldn't have to do it a ton. So you know, it's kind of a your mileage may vary situation. But we don't want is these to have a thick, goopy layer of paper dust on them. That's not terrible, okay? But if these get all built up with like a thick layer of paper dust, it will wear this stuff out eventually, right? So
kind of to the point of like something like that. You don't want that to be to appear on there.
But I want you guys to be careful because if somebody's down here cleaning these, you really need to disconnect the power and the air. If you're vacuuming and stuff up here in the top of the machine, you're not gonna, there's not a lot of dangerous stuff going on. But if any of your hands are up in here, inside of this mechanism, unhook the power and unhook the air. Okay.
Yep. So one of the things that I, just from past experience as being a machinist, if I had to clean a machine, I would turn the power off and then I would hit the e-stop on the machine. So just in case some idiot comes by and flicks the power, plugs it back in again, I still have the e-stop as a backup just in case. And there's 3 of them on this thing.
Yep. So just that's what I would do. I do a lot of stuff that's not all that safe, but that's just kind of the nature of my job. But for you guys that are operators, I do not want anybody getting their hands in anything like that. If I was putting my hands anywhere inside of the kind of the shell of this machine, I would have the power unhooked and the air unhooked, okay? So then there's no chance of anything getting you, right? Because it would be really easy if you're in here, laying underneath here, wiping those off and somebody throws paper in there and hits go. So this guy right here is a ball screw. That could get a wipe off once in a while and make sure that just has a light coating of oil. Again, I don't want to see it all gooped up with like axle grease or anything like that, but cleaned and lightly lubricated would be totally fine.
Okay, so something like WD-40 would be okay, right?
Yeah, something that sprays on and dries.
We have cans of dry lube. Okay.
Yeah, they make Teflon impregnated spray lubricants. That stuff would be good on it. Anything like that. Normally, if you weren't in a real dusty environment, you could probably put like a light coating of lithium grease on here. But for you guys, man, if you put that on there, it's just going to be turned into a nasty mess within a matter of a couple of days. So, in your situation, I just suggest keeping everything clean and lightly oiled. Same with these rails here. They kind of have wipers in them, so they keep themselves pretty clean, but you don't want to see a bunch of crap building up on those. Just give them a wipe down with a rag and put a little bit of light oil on there. I think that these actually even have a couple of little grease zerts on them. You could pump a little grease in them once in a while.
Yeah.
They're sealed up, and this isn't traveling up and down quickly all day. It's slowly going up, slowly going down. It's not like a high wear area, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Like I said, the biggest thing is do your best to keep it clean from paper dust. Yeah, that totally would be great. That would be fine for this. It's got the Teflon in it. It goes on. It stays dry. Awesome. Like I said, normally I would want to see stuff like this have a little bit of grease on it, but in this situation, it's just going to be a mess. So keep it clean, and then something like this. This isn't running up and down fast enough and hard enough all day where it's going to be worn out. That'll last 20 years. Lots of other things will wear out long before that ever does. So.
Okay.
So one of the things other things that I did notice is on the tray here. If I lower this for a second. So near the back here, where these two screws are, I see these are high wear spots where the screws from when people send it all the way down to the limiter switch, these screws tend to smash into the aluminum here.
Yeah.
And just because aluminum is softer than steel, it leaves gashes and
Go
stuff
ahead
in
and
it.
bring that down all the way. I might be able to move that switch up a tiny bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah, see? So like I have a deburring tool. So one day I came through here and I took that down. I kind of de-sharpened, changed it from being razor sharp to being where you can run your finger over it and not get splinters.
I think we could probably adjust that switch a tiny bit so that this doesn't quite come down and crash into that. We might be able to do that.
Okay, awesome.
So let's go to lunch. I won't take you guys any longer. Let's go do lunch and we'll come back and I gotta go make a couple of phone calls and stuff like that. We'll take a half an hour lunch and then we'll go from there. We'll work on this a little bit more, a couple of maintenance things, and then we'll probably start working on this guy. All right?
Okay, that works.
All right.